Hi, folks, and good evening. Thank you so much for joining us on this Solas webinar. Every week or every time we do one of these Solas webinars, we choose a live and important topic to discuss. And this time, our topic is very significant. The question is Christianity bad for the environment? Now, that is a charge that is often laid at the door of Christians. We hear it at Solas when we work on university campuses, particularly the charge that Christianity is inherently bad for the environment. It's a charge that you can read at an academic level. There's a famous book called The Historical Roots of Our Ecological Crisis by Lynn White. And in that book, Lynn White says that by replacing animism, in which the natural world is sacred, Christianity legitimized the exploitation of nature by man for his own ends. So academics sometimes lay the door for the ecological crisis lay the fault rather at the door of Christianity. That is also something that gets repeated at a popular level. This is one of my favorite books about the natural world, The Last Wilderness by Neil Ansell. Wonderful book, all about his travels around Highland Scotland, walking. And it's a beautiful reflection on the natural world. And then he throws in something like this. He says, we have to learn to progress beyond a place where we see only two types of animal, competitor or prey. It is a rather biblical outlook to see the world solely as a resource placed there for our own benefit. A biblical outlook. Well, there's the charge that Christianity is inherently bad for the environment. So should people who care about the natural world reject Christian faith as part of the problem? Or likewise, should those who are committed to Christianity, should they care for the natural world? Well, joining me to discuss this really significant topic this evening is Dr. Andy Bannister, who leads the Solas Centre for Public Christianity here in Scotland. Andy, you're online. How are you?
Doing really well this evening, Gavin. Great to be joining you, and really excited to dig into this topic. I think, as you say, it's an important one and one very close to my heart, and I know actually to your heart as well. You and I are both big outdoors people, spend lots of our time in the natural world. So yeah, really excited where we're going to go tonight.
And we think we're going to get a big dump of snow. You're going to get snow in Dundee tonight, do you think?
Well, like kids are praying hard because I have a 5-year-old and an 8-year-old in the house who are hoping that tomorrow might be a snow day. I have tried to explain that homeschool that we're having now, because obviously we're all in COVID, snow days don't really happen, but they are hoping. So we'll see what happens. But they are saying there could be the white stuff coming.
Marvelous. Now I'll hand over to Andy in a minute, who's going to open up this whole topic about Christianity and the natural world. But we would love you to be involved in our discussions this evening as well. As ever, the way we do that is through Pigeonhole, which is a nice online Q&A board. So the has just come up in it for you. If you go to pigeonhole.at and you type in the code SOLAS20Jan, that will open up a Q&A panel for this evening's topic. And if you throw in any questions, we can work through those, and you can shape the second half of our webinar this evening. Likewise, if when you go into Pigeonhole, you found a question which you think is particularly good or strong, or indeed the one you're going to type, vote for it, and it will go up to the top of the list. And we will start with the questions that get the most votes, and we will work our way down through those. We'll remind you later on about that code. So if you've missed it this time, don't worry. You may want to ask Andy to expand on something that he said, or probe a little deeper, or push back with a question. So I'm going to hand over to Andy now for the next few minutes. Andy, is Christianity inherently environmentally toxic? Andy.
Great. Well, thank you for that intro, Gavin. I'm just going to turn my slide share on, so hopefully that's coming through on the stream. And I'm going to basically share for the next 20-25 minutes some thoughts on this, and then we'll get in and dig into some questions. And you know, this the whole issue of the environment is one, of course, that's everywhere in our culture, kind of right now, from Greta Thunberg to David Attenborough, from Extinction Rebellion to politicians declaring climate change emergencies. Nature and the environment are issues that people today take ever more seriously, not least, I think, because of the growing number of challenges facing the environment. I mean, for sure, climate change is most commonly mentioned, but I sometimes feel actually that a lot of the noise and fuss around that issue it's not an important issue, but the noise around that issue can mask other equally pressing issues. For example, there's loss of biodiversity and growing extinction rates, deforestation, sea level rise, pollution, especially plastic in the oceans. And you know, you don't need to be an eco warrior or spray paint yourself green to see that we have a bit of a problem. Here in Scotland, where I live and Gavin lives, Scotland is often described as the best small country in the world, admittedly by the Scottish Tourism Office. But we enjoy wonderful scenery. We have wide open moors, beautiful mountains, big skies, and incredible beaches. But in the 4.5 years that I've been living here, as I've explored some of the furthest and wildest flung parts of the Scottish coastline, I've begun to notice the plastic. You kind of can't miss it. Tangled fishing nets and toothbrushes, bottles, and millions upon millions upon millions of pieces of just unidentifiable plastic littering the rack line. And the same is true globally. In fact, about 2 or 3 years ago, images went viral of hermit crabs on Henderson Island, a remote atoll in the Pacific. One crab was using a plastic doll's head as its shell, and another was using an empty tub of Avon night cream. Listen to these words from the best-selling British landscape writer, Robert Macfarlane. Robert writes, "What signatures our species will leave in the strata. We plunder whole mountaintops to remove whole mountaintops to plunder the coal that they contain. The oceans dance with thousands, hundreds of thousands of tons of plastic waste slowly settling into sea floor sediments. Weaponry tests have dispersed artificial radionuclides globally. The burning of rainforests for monoculture production sends out smog pools that settle into the soils of nations. A nitrogen spike indicated in ice cores and sediments will be one of the key chemical insignias of the Anthropocene. That's the geological age that we inhabit, caused by the mass global use of nitrogen-rich fertilizers and by fossil fuel burning. Biodiversity levels are crashing worldwide as we hasten into the sixth great extinction event. And while the soaring numbers of a small number of livestock species ensures the geological posterity in the fossil record of sheep, cows, and pigs, we have become titanic world makers, our legacy legible for epochs to come. Now, when it comes to Christianity and the natural world, sadly, Christians do sometimes have something of a checkered reputation. Gavin and I think we kind of share similar reading. I too was rummaging through Neil Ansell the other day, and Last Wilderness, which Gavin also worked around, wonderful book, really powerfully written. But in it, I came across this sad little paragraph. Gavin just gave us one line from it, but let me give you the context. And in that book, he writes, "I was surprised to come across a man in the depths of the woods. He had a shotgun cocked in the crook of his arm, and he was wearing a deer stalker. He asked me if I'd seen, a big grey fox, and happily I was unable to help him. The pine marten lady had warned me that many people locally had a relationship with wildlife that consisted almost exclusively of killing it. It is a rather biblical outlook to see the world solely as a resource placed there for our benefit." And as Gavin also shared in the intro when he used the same quote, that Neil can casually describe the wanton destruction of nature as a biblical outlook is profoundly saddening. And for sure, if those of us who are Christian watching this were able to push back on Neil and say his view is wrong or unfair, so be it. But the more important question for me is, where have people like Neil and others, and I hear similar accusations from many, where have they gotten the idea from that Christians don't care about the environment? Or sadly, there are plenty of examples that fuel this idea. For example, a few years ago at the Catalyst Conference, a large church conference in Dallas, Texas, controversial megachurch pastor Mark Driscoll said these words. He said, "I know who made the environment, and he's coming back, and he's going to burn it all up. So yes, I drive an SUV." Well, thanks for that, Mark. This negative attitude towards the environment that's typified by that quote and that has sometimes characterized, tragically, the response of some Christians towards the natural world has its roots, I think, in a misunderstanding of the very first chapter of the Bible. In Genesis chapter 1, verse 26, we read these words. God said, "Let us make mankind in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the earth and over every creeping thing that creeps upon the earth. And historically, sadly, some Christians have taken the idea of dominion in that verse and taken it to suggest that nature is basically there to serve us. Minerals, materials only exist so we can mine them. Fossil fuels only exist so we can burn them. Forests only exist so we can chop them down. And animals only exist so we can eat them. And animals with no obvious utility, moral novelty at best, and a nuisance at worst. But I think I'd want to say this is a deeply flawed misunderstanding of the idea of dominion. Sure, dominion means to rule over, but built into it is the idea of care and responsibility. For example, if you send your kids off to school, you are handing dominion over your children to the school and to the teachers. I'm expecting you probably do expect to get your kids safely back at the end of the day. Or similarly, if I lend you my car, if you come to me and say, Andy, could I borrow your car for an afternoon? My own car's in the garage being fixed. I've got some errands to run. And if I lend you my car, I toss you the car keys, I'm giving you dominion over my car. And if you return it to me a day later, dented and scratched with the seats covered in vomit, then probably I may want to ask you a few questions. And if your defense is simply, well, you gave me dominion over the car, I had the ability to do what I wanted, probably that isn't really going to cut it as an answer. Well, all of this matters, of course. All of this backstory and context matters because I believe firmly, not merely that Christians have no excuse for mistreating the environment, but I want to go a bit further and suggest that only the Christian faith can actually tell us why we should care about the environment and the natural world. And if you're watching this webinar this evening live or on catch up later and you don't have any kind of faith but you care about the environment, I hope to make you think about the idea that actually the natural place for your care for the environment is actually located within the Christian faith. Now, why do I say that? Well, see, here's the interesting thing. Behind every environmental issue, behind every environmental concern, behind every environmental campaign lies the implicit assumption that this issue, be it climate change, ocean plastic, extinction, deforestation, whatever it is that's being campaigned about, the line behind the campaign lies the assumption that this issue is one that we should care about and want to do something about. But of course, that raises the question, why? Why should we personally care? Why do we owe any duty of care to the natural world and to the environment? Now, our friends in the environmental movement have not been slow to realize they do need to answer the why question. And over the years, there have been several secular attempts to answer that question, to provide some kind of foundation or basis for environmentalism. Let's look at a few of the common ones. The first approach that many in the environmental movement began with, and they still appeal to from time to time, you can see this going on, is an appeal to emotion. So lots of environmental campaigns will try appealing to your emotions. For example, some of them will try to make you feel guilty. Stop driving your SUV or the polar bears will drown. While people like Greta Thunberg have tried major guilt trips. They're using the language to suggest that adults are destroying the future for young people. And so you'll find many environmental campaigns will appeal to our guilt. Others go a different direction and appeal to our compassion, showing us pictures of cute little baby animals, hoping they can tug at our heartstrings and generate a response. Notice there's always cute little baby animals. So, Sammy the seal, has obviously, earns huge amounts in fees for appearing on posters, whereas, small, ugly baby toads don't get a look in. But cute animals turn up on posters and tug at our heartstrings, hoping we'll go, oh, look at the little seal. Let's give some money to this particular campaign. But whether it's appealing to our guilt, whether it's appealing to our compassion, emotion is a terrible foundation for environmentalism. Because what do? You're talking to somebody and they don't feel the emotion. What if you don't feel guilty? See, the problem is emotions are deeply personal preferences. And we need something far more than mere personal preference to ground environmental concern, given some of the challenges we're facing in our world today. So can we do better than emotion? Well, a second attempt that secular environmentalists have tried is to appeal to our self-interest and appeal to how environmental care benefits us. For example, we're told that we should care about pesticides in the food chain because those cause human illness. We're told that climate change could cause sea level rise, which threatens human towns and cities. Or we're told that we should care about the collapse in the numbers of bees and other insects because they're important, because they pollinate our fruits and our crops. In other words, we should care about the environment because it's good for us. Now, this is certainly a better argument than emotion, but there's still a massive problem in that it is inherently selfish. After all, presumably bits of nature that don't personally benefit us are fair game. It also fails entirely to engage people who can say things like, well, actually, I'm not worried. I live on a hill, so sea level rise doesn't affect me. I only eat meat, so pollinators and pesticides don't worry me. In other words, I'm rich enough and my lifestyle set up in such a way that I don't need to care. And this approach to environmentalism has nothing to say to that kind of selfishness. And so a third way that has been tried by environmentalism is to appeal to say that we owe it to future generations. Some environmental campaigns will try and insist that it's our duty to bequeath to our descendants a world that is clean, an ecosystem that is intact. In other words, to hand on a world that is at least as good, if not better, than the one that we inherited. And so it's a very common argument you can hear out there, but again, it begs some pretty big questions. Not least, it begs the question, why? Why do we owe anything to hypothetical future people? What precisely is the connection there? And again, what do you say to the selfish person who simply says, you know what, I don't have any children, and I don't plan to have any, so quite frankly, I don't care about future generations. They can all go burn as far as I care. And again, this approach has nothing to say to that kind of person, and we're stuck once again. Well, now the secular attempts to ground environmentalism are beginning to get desperate. For example, some have suggested that, well, maybe we should care about the natural world, especially animal life, because we're closely related to it. So, for example, it is often pointed out that we share roughly 96% of our DNA in common with chimpanzees. But why does my sharing something in common with something mean I should have any duty of care? Why should I care about it? I mean, after all, I have carbon atoms in common with a table, and I share over 60% of my DNA with the humble banana. Does that mean I have some kind of duty to care about tables and bananas? I don't think so, and I think the argument simply doesn't work. But the reason that I think over the last decades, a few decades or so, that the environmental movement has tried to work so hard to solve this problem is because at its heart, environmentalism is essentially a moral issue. You see, it's one thing to tell people facts. It's another thing to start telling people how they should behave because of those facts. For example, it may be totally true that our generation consumes 5 times more energy than our grandparents who lived more modestly than we do. It may equally be true that if we assign weights to the amount of energy used, the average person in China weighs 100 pounds, the average European weighs 1,000 pounds. But to move from that bare fact to therefore insisting that we should think about how we live or change our habits of overconsumption, that we should consider the natural world as an end, not a means, well, those are moral claims. They're not scientific claims. And all moral claims need a foundation. So when you insist to somebody they should change their behavior, that person has the right to say to you, but why should I change how I'm living? I want to argue that only the Christian faith can provide the strong foundations that we need for a robust duty of care for creation. Secular environmental movements have largely failed. They aren't able to justify the claims that they make. But I do think Christianity can go further, because written into the Bible is one of the most powerful motivations for environmental care that I know, namely the idea that the natural world is no accident, but was created by God and given to us as a gift. See, I think God has created an amazing world, a world that throughout the Bible he repeatedly describes as good. And throughout the Bible, we read how much God cares for the natural world that he's made. We're told he even knows when a sparrow falls from the sky, said Jesus. And if we take Genesis seriously, if we take the Bible seriously, if we are either Christians or we're thinking seriously about spiritual questions, then we have a powerful mandate to care for and take the environment seriously, because the environment is God's gift to us. And so as a Christian, I would answer the question, why should we care about the environment? Why do we have a duty of care for it? I would say the answer is pretty straightforward: because God is real, because we do live in a moral universe grounded in the character of God, and because that God who created us and created the world of which we are part has commanded us and instructed us to look after and steward and care for the world that he has made. And on top of that, to care for it because the natural world is God's beautiful gift to us. And the response to a beautiful gift should be, if we are functioning normally, gratitude. In fact, one could argue that the entire of Christian ethics is actually a response of gratitude. The Bible in the New Testament repeatedly says, because of what God has done for us, most specifically in and through Jesus Christ, we live differently. When it comes to nature and the natural world, God has given us a beautiful gift, an amazing world, an incredible gift, and treating it with care, just as you would treat with care a beautiful gift given to you by a friend or a lover or a spouse. That's a fitting response and is a powerful basis for creation care. But we can draw something more from this too, as we begin drawing some of these threads together. You see, the fact that nature is God's gift matters tremendously, because gifts tell us a lot about the giver and what they think of us. If somebody gives you a gift, it tells you quite a lot about what the person giving you the gift thinks about you. And the same, I think, is true of the natural world. And here's the interesting thing. When we either forget that the natural environment is God's gift, or we neglect the gift that he has given us, I think the result can sometimes be a deep sickness. Back in 2007, a new edition of the Oxford Junior Dictionary was published. And people very quickly noticed that the editors had removed a lot of words to do with nature. Gone were words like acorn and beech, fern, newt, otter and willow. In their place had come words like attachment, celebrity, chat room and email. When challenged about this, the head of children's dictionaries at Oxford University Press said that they wanted the dictionary to, and I quote, reflect the consensus of the experience of modern childhood. I think something has gone badly wrong if we are raising a generation of children who know what an email is, but can't identify a tree. See, I think everywhere we look in the world, you see people struggling because we have lost our connection to the world. And when we lose that connection, that can damage or mar our connection to the God who made it and gifted it to us. And the Bible makes that connection between the gift of nature and God and his character very, very clear. For example, in Psalm 19 in the Bible, we read these words: the heavens declare the glory of God, the skies proclaim the work of his hands. Day after day they pour forth speech, night after night they reveal knowledge. They have no speech, they use no words, no sound is heard from them, yet their voice goes out into all the earth, their words to the ends of the earth. See, I believe that nature and the environment matter because they are God's good gift to us. I believe they matter because they point to the goodness of the God who made nature and who made us. And also because I believe that nature and the environment matter so much, that's why we need to do something about the environmental problems that face our world. And when you take Christian faith seriously, it gives you a tremendous impetus for that. Of course, that raises the question, what's the solution? Right now as a society, we are, so much of our public discourse is full of, conversations about, well, how do we fix, some of the mess that we made of the natural world? And it's very easy to assume that the answer is to reduce carbon emissions, or to ban plastic packaging, or to send Greta Thunberg on another world tour. But what if something more profound is needed? One of the world's most influential climate scientists in recent years is Gus Speth. Leading climate scientist for some years, he was an advisor, senior advisor to the US government, now works at the United Nations. He is a brilliant scientist who arguably knows more about the environment than the vast majority of people in the world. He has spent decades working in the area of environment and nature and their protection. But it's very interesting, therefore, to listen to his diagnosis of what's gone wrong with the world. As far as I know, Gus has no religious faith, but what he says as in terms of how we solve and what the problems are at the heart of the environmental crisis is really, really revealing. Gus writes, he says, I used to think that the top environmental problems were biodiversity loss, ecosystem collapse, and climate change. I thought that 30 years of good science could address those problems. But I was wrong. The top environmental problems are selfishness, greed, and apathy. And to deal with these, we need a cultural and a spiritual transformation. And we scientists don't know how to do that. See, the Bible says that nature is like a signpost. Its goodness, its beauty, and its wonder are a pointer to the God who made it and to how much he loves us. But the brokenness that we see in God's good world are also a signpost. They're a signpost. They're a reflection of the brokenness in me and in you, and of how we are separated not just from the God who created us, but we are also separated from a proper connection with the world that he has made through our selfishness and our greed and our apathy, what the Bible calls sin. But if you read more widely in the scriptures and the Bible, you discover the good news is that the story of what God did in Jesus, when he stepped into the natural world that he had made, when he went to the cross in our place to deal with our brokenness, to deal with our guilt and to deal with our apathy and our greed and our self-centeredness, to deal with our sin and our brokenness. The Bible says that's not just the answer to our own separation from God and our separation from one another, but it's also the answer at its heart to what's gone wrong with the natural world. And I find actually when we look at what we've done to God's world, I regularly find a kind of 3-word prayer springs to mind. I use this a lot myself when I reflect on my own sometimes misuse and casualness about the environment, and certainly what we've done as human beings. Sorry, thanks, and please. You know, well, you can pray, sorry, God, for the mess that we've made of this beautiful world that you've given us. We can pray thank you for the wonderful gift that you have given us in the natural world. And you can pray, please, would you work in us and through us to make a difference and put something right that we have broken. And you know, that prayer is good insofar as it goes. But if Gus Seth is right, that the bigger issues are spiritual and much deeper in us, if the Bible is right, and I think that it is, that the way to put the world right begins with putting ourselves right with God, then that 3-word prayer can work a different way. Sorry, thanks, and please. We can pray, sorry, Lord. Sorry, God, that I have been selfish and that I've been greedy, that I've been apathetic. Sorry that I've ignored you and not been grateful for the gift of life and of the world. Sorry for the mess I have made of things. Thank you for sending Jesus to die for my selfishness and my brokenness, to deal with what the Bible calls sin. And then please, would you please forgive me? Make me your child, fill me with your spirit, and renew my heart and my life from the inside out. And the wonderful news is the Bible promises that for those who put their hope and their trust in Jesus, we can become new creations. And it promises us too that environmental destruction is not the end of the world, but that through Jesus, there is also hope and the promise too that the earth too will become a new creation. Sorry, thanks, and please. And I think that's a great place to bring us to a close this part of the evening, and back to Gavin.
Thank you, Andy. I'm sure for a lot of people that will be a very different perspective on the relationship between Christianity and the natural world than they've heard before. If all that was kind of new to you, bear in mind that you can sort of scroll back, and if you're on YouTube, for example, hear all this again. If you wanted, for example, to pull out that Gus Speth sort of quote, which is so profound, it's all there. You can wind back and watch it again. because I'm just very aware that there's a huge amount that's kind of been compressed into a few minutes there that might take a bit longer to process. It certainly did for me the first time I tried to think through some of those ideas. It is Q&A time. Thank you so much for all those people that have sort of joined in with the Q&A so far. It was a slow start, but it started to move. I can see that people are posting into the board, which is just over here to my left, and also starting to vote for some of the questions to bring them up to the top. I can see that my colleague David there has brought up the link. If you'd like to join in, ask any questions, challenge Andy on something, or ask him to develop some of these thoughts more, then do come over and join us at solas.at. Put in the code SOLAS20JAN, and that will open up the Q&A panel for today. And there's just a couple of minutes you can do that and vote for the questions as we go. Andy, I didn't know that you were going to quote from the Neil Ansell book near the beginning. That's a terrific read. Had I had a bit longer, I was going to use that whole quote, but I thought just
I'm so glad. I'm so glad. You know what's interesting, Gavin? We were saying at the start that, I think you and I share a lot of sort of thinking in common. Our love for the natural world. We read a lot of the same things. So yes, when you, I have to confess, when you wave that around, oh gee, do I need to take that slide out? But it's a good enough quote to use. And I also want to recommend to people, it's a brilliant book. I don't agree with everything that Neil writes, but one of the things I find fascinating is how when you read writers in the natural world, and I would include Neil in this, I quoted from Robert Macfarlane. One of the things, Gavin, I noticed a few years ago, because I read so widely in this, was they keep stumbling across spirituality. I don't think you can actually think deeply about nature without that happening. Whether it's John Muir, the founder of the kind of sort of national park movement in the States, who was originally Scottish, right through to the present day, people like Robert Macfarlane or Jim Crumley. There are others I could list who are writing at the top of their game in the natural and the sort of genre of natural world sort of writings. It's interesting. Page after page, you come across them stumbling across spiritual questions. I think Psalm 19 holds true, because as you would imagine, I would think it would. Excellent.
So you ready for some of these questions that have come in? There's just another one come in while we've been speaking there.
Yeah, let's see.
The one that's come up to the very top of the list is this. This has got a couple of votes. There's several with one vote, but with 2 votes, this one's at the top at the moment. It says, if what you say is true, why have Christians not led the way in creation care?
Oh, what a fantastic question. Thank you, whoever asked that. Do
it's anonymous, that one.
It's anonymous. Well, okay, thanks, Anne, for that question. And Andy will never do that joke again. Here's the interesting thing. For a long time, what's so tragic is that Christians did, in many ways, lead the world in creation care. I mean, we could go back further in time historically, but let's just take the modern environmental movement. If you look at the origin of that, especially in the USA, where the studies on this have been more done, more of the history has been written. There's an amazing book written by Mark Stoll called Inherit the Holy Mountain that came out about 3 years ago. And that book traces the phenomena that if you look at all the founding fathers and mothers of the environmental movement, especially in the USA, they either were Christian or they'd all been raised in thoroughly Christian backgrounds. So I mentioned John Muir earlier. So John was, Scottish Presbyterian kind of roots, migrated to the USA, and then was the working in concert with a few others. Was really the founding father of the national park movement in the States. That although not just had a big impact over there, then went on to have a knock-on impact in Canada and also back over here as well. And John, people would sort of say, when he was sort of giving sort of his environmental sort of exhortations to people, it sounded like an old-fashioned Scottish Presbyterian preacher. And John, although he had a kind of wobbly phase in the middle of his life, thoroughly Christian at the beginning, thoroughly Christian at the end, and even in the middle when he was sort of wandering away a little bit from more orthodox Christianity, those who've looked at his writings would say it is soaked in biblical theology and language everywhere. Or we come through to the book that in many ways, launched the modern environmental movement, Rachel Carson's book, Silent Spring, that came out in the 60s and really first opened people's eyes to the damage that things like chemicals and pesticides were doing. Rachel raised in a Christian home, to a Christian college. And again, although in adult life wasn't quite fully sure what she herself believed, her writings are saturated with Christian theology. Mark, in that book, Inherit the Holy Mountain, then points out what sadly kind of happened as you go into the sort of 70s and 80s, was for a whole number of reasons. Christianity and the environmental movement began to part company. Christians sadly began to see the environmental movement as belonging more to sort of progressive kind of secular agenda, because some of the voices that were then coming to the fore, and so Christians, I think it was really Christians abandoned it. But then what Marx says is, of course, is both lost out. Christians, forgot the fact that environmentalism is deep in biblical Christian theology, and then the environmental movement lost all of its moral impetus. And that's the issue we are today. All they can do is shriek at people and try and make you feel guilty and glue themselves to buses. There's no ability to sort of go, let me explain to you why this matters and really connect with the heart. And Mark's book is a great impassioned plea to put those two halves back together again. And here in the UK, the story's not quite as dramatic, but still pretty much so. I mean, you look at the one of our perhaps most influential environmental organisations in the UK, the National Trust, beloved here in the UK, looks after millions of acres of land and cares for it. That was founded by Christians. And so the sad thing is, I think that has been forgotten. And so what I would say now, I really just encourage Christians, rather than, let people perhaps you might disagree with, sort of philosophically run away with the movement. Christians need to wade back in and get involved. Not merely because I think we've got amazing reason to do so, not merely because of that history, but actually there's a witness there. For those of you who are Christians watching this, if on one of the most important cultural issues of the age we're seen to be going, I'm not interested, then no wonder people are going to go, well, the gospel, Jesus got nothing to say to me. So I want to put those two halves back together again.
Okay, thank you for that. Okay, next up then is coming near the top of the board, kind of a theological question. Someone's wanting to know if your use of the Garden of Eden, the Genesis narrative, means that you're also commending veganism.
Oh, what an absolutely great question. And it's interesting, if you read those first chapters of the Bible, certainly, the implication there in the very first few chapters is that veganism was there in the beginning, or certainly vegetarianism. Let's not go. I'm not sure you can go all the way towards veganism, but certainly, our first ancestor did seem to have been vegetarian. And but then a few chapters on, after the story of the flood, God does then extend the mandate to human beings and give that permission for eating meat as well. Here's the thing that is interesting. I think whether one is a vegan or a vegetarian or a full-blooded omnivore as a Christian, I think the question becomes not so much what you eat, but how you eat. I often have this conversation with vegan friends. It's very easy as a vegan, and I have many vegan friends, to become a bit sort of morally superior. Well, my food choices are much more superior to anybody else's. But when you start looking at the impact of that lifestyle, it's not quite as clean. Right, take something like the humble avocado, which forms the center part of many sorts of funky kind of vegan meals. The amount of water that's used in producing avocados in countries where water is a really, really limited resource is quite disturbing. We look at food miles, the sort of carbon footprint of some vegan foods are terrific, and also the impact of things like monoculture production. So almonds, for example, almond milk is a commonly used milk substitute used by many in the vegan community. Look at the damage that monoculture production of almonds has done in places like California, massive environmental damage. So all of us, whether we are meat eaters or vegan, vegetarians, I think need to ask the question, how is the way that I'm, eating and consuming, how does it affect others around me? How does it affect the producers in poorer parts of the world? And how does it affect the environment more generally? But that, Gavin, brings us back to the question of why does it matter? Because, of course, if we live in a purely naturalistic universe, then, of course, we can do entirely as we want. Everything is just configurations of atoms and particles. And if one configuration of atoms wishes to, eat in such a way that is bad for another configuration of atoms on the other side of the planet, what the heck matters? On the other hand, if this world is God's gift to us, it's not an accident. And if human beings are not an accident, but are God's image bearers, as the book of Genesis tells us, then that gives us a terrific impetus and foundation to think very seriously about our food choices, both in terms of what it does to the environment, but also in terms of what it does to other human beings involved in the food production.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. Okay, we're going to a question here that's labeled, the name is Susie on this one, and she's picking up something that has come up at school. And again, this is picking up the narrative that Christian faith and care for the environment are inherently contradictory. Let me read you the question. It's in RE, that's Religious Education School. We were taught that Christianity sees humans as separate from nature and God even more so. And therefore, the only way to save Mother Cosmos again. Andy.
Yeah, excellent. Can you just repeat the last half of that, Gavin? Because your video glitched at that point. So humans are separate, God is separate, and then the last part you went glitchy.
Yeah, it has glitched a bit.
Okay, well, let me begin
Also,
answering it. Yeah, no, don't worry. I'll begin answering it while I'll also pull up Pigeonhole as well. So if we have problems with you, Gavin, I can also look it through. Well, let me begin by the first half of that question. The idea that, Susie, thank you for that question, that human beings and God are separate from nature. First thing I find interesting, actually, everybody thinks there is something special about human beings. I find this absolutely fascinating. Certainly Christians, we believe that human beings, I wouldn't say separate from nature. I think if you read the book of Genesis and take it seriously, we are very much part of nature. We are made from the dust of the earth. We are physical and we are deeply related to creation. But yes, we are also different because God breathes his spirit into us and we bear God's image. There is something unique for Christians about human beings. But for my atheist friends, there is something unique about human beings. For example, it's only human beings who are considered to have any moral imperative in how we behave. Take the vegan question we've just looked at there. I don't see my vegan secular friends going around, telling wolves off or foxes off for raiding the chicken coop. I don't see them, imploring animals that are carnivores to say, no, you should stop, eating, rabbits and mice and chickens. You should have a corn-based diet. It's only human beings who are told that we have a certain duty of care to the environment. I find that fascinating. And actually, I remember doing a debate with a guy called Andrew Copson, who was the head of what was at the time called the British Humanist Association at the University of Hull a few years ago. And this kind of point rose. And it was interesting, during the interaction part of the evening where he and I were dialoguing with each other, I pressed him on this, and he was interesting. He finally sort of smiled. He went, I do admit that human uniqueness is a bit like the bubble on the wallpaper. You kind of push it down here and it just pops up over here. I don't think you could escape from it. So I think all of us actually believe in human uniqueness and that there's something special and different about ours. The question is why it is. And I would certainly say as Christians, that doesn't mean we have the ability or the right to lord it over the rest of creation and abuse it. Rather, in Genesis, that special relationship, that special position of human beings is the basis for us being told we have ones who have a duty of care. Monkeys and aardvarks and lettuces and fish and so forth, they don't have any duty of care to us. We do to them. And if you lose that, then you lose all basis for environmentalism. That's the first thing. Secondly, the other thing that Susie, you said that you were taught in RE, that God is separate. I find that fascinating because there are certainly religions and religious belief systems in which God kind of floats around out here somewhere, having nothing to do with the world that he's made. To some degree, that's the case in Islam. You have a God, an all-powerful God who creates everything and then remains up there in heaven, just sending down laws and commandments and edicts. There are certain other Eastern spiritualities where God is quite separate, and even sort of more perhaps sort of New Agey sort of spiritualities that people play with here in the West. Those are actually quite separate in some ways from creation. They're often quite focused on me and my needs and my happiness. God is almost my therapist, but nothing's there to be said about creation. But the God of the Bible, oh my word, Susie, what a different God we're talking about, because we're talking about a God who steps into creation in the person of Jesus, a God who is very close and personal, a God who gets his feet dusty with the dust of the world, his hands bloody with the nails of the world. And you can say many things or ask many questions about the God of the Bible. When you look at Jesus, who the Bible says is the person you want to look at if you want to know what God is like, he is the very best demonstration of who God is when God came in the person of Jesus. You almost can't get more earthy than Jesus. And so I don't think there's that separateness there. And the last part of the question that I just read off the Pigeonhole, because having glitched when he read it, of course, if the only way to save the earth, as you said, you were told, is to be one with it, well, the problem is how do you save something you're part of anyway? There's no distinction between us and the earth. And so where do we begin? Where do we begin and the earth end, or vice versa? And even knowing what it is we have to save is a little bit of a problem. And I think things get dreadfully confusing. So I think the Christian faith gives you the unique position of human beings, a unique responsibility It identifies, what the real issue is, our greed and our selfishness. And of course, if you believe you're part of Mother Earth, then of course Mother Earth is equally greedy and self-centered because you're part of her. But the Christian faith says no. That actually is an alien intrusion, that sinful aspect of us into God's good creation. It needs dealing with, and that's what God has offered to do in the person of Jesus. Sorry, it was quite a long answer, but that was a three-part question you asked, Susie. Every part of it was brilliant.
And it enabled me to reconnect to the internet while you were answering it. So thank you for that. And while you were speaking, there's been some votes. So the order of the questions has jumped around a bit. Someone is asking, do you support initiatives such as the Eco Congregation Scotland, where churches are trying to address their own kind of carbon footprint and how is that a good thing for churches to be involved in?
Yeah, I was going to say, I will put my hand up completely and say I'm not aware of that particular one, but I have been across the years involved in others, certainly during my time in Canada, involved in certain initiatives. And actually, I've got a very good friend of mine. One of my very good friends in the States is in the Mennonite tradition, and there's a lot of sort of stuff in that church background, really trying to make a difference. I'm definitely very much in favor of Christians kind of coming together, thinking intelligently and smartly, both about how we live responsibly, how we bear a good witness in that regard, and also how we can be a voice within the environmental movement. Because I sometimes meet Christians who are a bit nervous about the environmental movement. That question that Susie raised, is the environmental movement full of sort of people who are into sort of new agey type spiritualities and all kinds of strange things? And the answer is there are those people. But the way to engage those people is not to refuse to get involved in some of the big conversations of our age and go, well, I can't go over there because it's scary. I read the New Testament, and the model I see is no, we need to roll up our sleeves as Christians and wade right in and come alongside people and be part of the conversation. And as we do, raise some of the questions I've raised this evening of, why do these things matter? Why do we have this duty of care to the world around us? But absolutely, I think it's hugely important that Christians make a difference on this issue. And the other reason, Gavin, is this: if the gospel is true, as a Christian, I have long believed that if the gospel is true, it changes everything. You can't simply be, I'm a follower of Jesus, but that doesn't affect anything about the world around me. If Jesus is truly Lord of my life, which is what it means to be a Christian, that has surely got to affect my politics. It's surely got to affect how I live with those around me. It's surely got to affect the way that I use the resources that God has given us, and that I don't shy away from some of the big questions. If I just go and hide my way under a box, and go I'm a Christian, but I'm not even going to think about this stuff, I'm not sure what type of Christianity that is. Because in everything our model is Jesus. And Jesus, he didn't just float around telling people, hey, God loves you, get your sins dealt with and go to heaven. Jesus engaged the politics. He engaged the issues of the day. He dealt with injustice. He dealt with economics. He dealt with, oppression and all kinds of other things and the issues of his day. And as his followers, we need to be looking at doing the same today with the issues of our day.
Yeah. Isn't there an old heresy called antinomianism that suggests you can just sit back, enjoy the grace of God and just live how the heck you want? But the gospel actually has implications for how we respond. It's what Dietrich Bonhoeffer would have called cheap grace, just accept the grace of God and just live the easy way that you want. But actually, I think it's pretty clear what you're saying that, if you respond to the free grace of God, that has huge implications for everything from how you spend your time to your money to how you inhabit this world. Okay, we have a theologian here called Roger who wants to pick you up on something that you said. You described creation as God's gift to us. Roger wants to say, is it true to say that it was God's gift to himself? All things were created by him and for him. And the cosmos was there millions of years before we came on the scene.
Yeah, fair dues, Roger. And to go, never pick a fight with a theologian, and they'll tie your knots. Yeah, you are absolutely right. To go, yeah. I mean, the beautiful thing about this is also, I'll tell you also something else that I think is fascinating. That of course, one of the problems you have, if you remove God from the picture, when you start talking about why the universe has any kind of value, why does nature have any value? It's very hard to get a basis for that. Why do stars and galaxies and solar systems matter? Why do they have any value? Does a mountain view only have a value if people can go and see it on tourist excursions, or we can print it on postcards? Or does it have value in some other way? And once you realize that, yes, all things were created initially by God for his pleasure and his glory, then to go, it matters because God takes a delight in it. That mountain view matters because God created it when, hey, it's good. It's beautiful. It's wonderful. I love the sheer excess of God's creation. You know, God could have created a universe, you know, that was like a tenth of the size. He could have created a planet that was all a single ecosystem and environment type. It was all rainforest or all desert or something, but he didn't. He created creation in all its rich splendor and did it because, you know, it gave him delight and reflected his glory. But there is then the gift component. God then gives that to us as a gift as well, that idea of stewardship. When God effectively goes to Adam and Eve, you know, when he creates human beings, look what I've made. And now enjoy it and be fruitful and go out there and take dominion, have care over it. And then, as I say, we see that thread running through Scripture, and human beings don't do that, that actually God holds them to account. And then, as I say, at the end of the Bible, people sometimes have this impression that Christian faith is all about escaping this, you know, physical world and going to heaven and floating on a cloud. I don't know what that is. It's not Christianity, because the language that the Bible uses time and time again for our future eternity is it talks about a new heavens and a new earth, that God is going to renew and restore and redeem all of creation, the heavens and the earth, and the heavens and the earth are going to come down and be as one. And God will rule over it, and we will walk and talk and enjoy a relationship with God in that renewed creation. And so I think it's a wonderful, wonderful picture when you take that whole biblical picture, created for God's delight, and it has value with before human beings were ever thought of, were ever created. You know, again, God is going to restore it and redeem it and rescue it and put right what's gone wrong, and then it's going to have an eternal quality too. Forever infused with the presence of God. My word, the Bible has huge amounts to say about creation. So thank you, Roger, for picking me up on that. And I hope that that reassured you that I agree with you entirely.
So if Roger is our sort of theologian on our Q&A panel, I think the next one, Ozzy, might be our comedian. I suspect this question might be slightly tongue-in-cheek. Let me read this one to you. It says, Dawkins says there is a multiverse, an infinite number of universes. This means that ours isn't special at all. Is atheism truly compatible with environmentalism?
Oh, well, thank you very much for that, and Ozzy. Yeah, I mean, slightly tongue-in-cheek, but I think Ozzy's onto something. And I think one of the big problems you have on atheism is that if you take atheism at its bare essentials, that there is no God, everything is just atoms and particles. That's all that there is. There is no higher value, no higher purposes of any kind. Then, of course, saying why anything matters and why we should behave in a certain way, why certain actions are good or bad, become hugely problematic. And what I like with what Ozzy's done there, Ozzy's taken it to the next level. And for those who are not familiar with the language of the multiverse, you know, Dawkins, along with many other atheists, really has a struggle to deal with the fact that the universe that we live in looks to be what philosophers call fine-tuned for life. A lot of the laws that sort of underpin the physics have some particular numbers programmed into them, and those numbers are very, very precise. Things like the law of gravitational attraction. If the gravitational constant was a fraction higher or a fraction lower by an infinitesimal amount, there would be no universe at all. Not just no human beings, there would be no reality. And the universe looks, as one atheist put it, like a put-up job. In fact, I think it was Fred Hoyle, the great atheist cosmologist, who first coined the term Big Bang. On one occasion said, you know, the more I study the laws of physics, the more it looks like someone's monkeyed with the laws of physics. They look like a put-up job. And to solve that problem, Dawkins and others came up with the idea of the multiverse. Once again, maybe this isn't the only universe. Maybe there are billions and billions and billions, an infinite number of other universes with all the laws of physics, all programmed slightly differently, and we happen to just live in one of them. And of course, as Ozzy nicely points out, there are a number of things that flow from that. And one would be, well, this universe isn't special at all. There are infinite numbers of the darn things. And okay, some are ones where, you know, nothing happened because the numbers were wrong. There are plenty where stuff did, and so therefore, why care about this one? But if this is the special creation of a God who did fine-tune the laws of physics, who carefully and intricately designed it, not just so it functions so beautifully. And I think it was Einstein who described the laws of physics as, you know, at times being closer to art than they are to anything else, but then also created this, you know, world as a gift to us, among other things, as Roger pointed out. Then I think, you know, that gives us a much better basis for taking care of it. So I think, yeah, I think atheism struggles with all of these things. And I think actually, Gavin, that's one reason why many in the environmental movement do actually wander off into sort of New Age Eastern spiritualities, because it's patently obvious that atheism doesn't work. And Christians have been too silent. So people desperate for a spirituality have gone, oh, well, I guess I'll look east. And what I want to say to them is, I think you should look east, but don't look to India. Look east and round a bit to the Middle East. And in particular, look to Israel and look to the 1st century and look to a person called Jesus of Nazareth. And take another look and look at some of what he said, because that's, I think, the best basis for care for the natural world. Certainly not atheism, I'm afraid. Thank you, Ozzy. That was a great question. Enjoyed
it's
that.
kind of against us, so we're going to have to kind of increase the speed, compress the answers a little bit. We might rattle through a few more before our time.
I'm you know, the caffeine is flowing, and I'm yeah. But I'll try and do some shorter ones. They're good questions, though. People need to ask shorter questions. But
okay. So there's a bit of pushback here.
Oh, good. Pushback. That's what we like.
Okay, so stop. Well, what that subject is saying, shouldn't Christians really stick to preaching about Jesus and about sin and forgiveness and everlasting life, and not kind of dig into some of these kind of pressing current topics? Andy?
Yeah, it's interesting. You do sadly hear in some parts of the church, I think some Christians sort of have somehow got it into their heads that, we mustn't talk about the environment, we mustn't talk about justice. Those things have nothing to do with Jesus and the gospel, and rather we just talk about Jesus and salvation and going to heaven, and the rest of the stuff is somehow sub-Christian, irrelevant, a distraction, whatever. I think I'd say a couple of things there. I'd say if that's the case, then Jesus didn't get that memo. Nor did many of the writers of the New Testament. I mean, Jesus spent huge amounts of time talking about, injustice and poverty and the big issues of his day. He didn't talk about climate change because that wasn't an issue in the 1st century. But boy, he talked about a lot of things around injustice and the big societal issues of the day. And I think he very much saw Christian faith as having something to say about those. Or we come to the New Testament, and particularly the later New Testament, on issues like poverty and injustice, which are actually connected to environmentalism, because it's often poor communities that suffer the most when bits of the environment go wrong. The book of James, I think it is, that says, how on earth as a Christian can you sort of say to someone, hey, be blessed and God loves you and all these kind of things, if they're starving, hungry, and you don't deal with their hunger. So I think the message of the New Testament is, you can't be a Christian disconnected from the world around you, because the gospel affects absolutely everything. And as you, I think a moment ago, Gavin, said something when you were going at high speed that was very wise. There are two ancient heresies, two ancient sort of caricatures of Christianity that have really nothing to do with the Christian faith, that pop up again and again in history. One is antinomianism, long word there, which is the idea that as a Christian, you can live as you darn well like. The whole world can go hang, it doesn't matter because it's not really spiritual. And I can do whatever I damn well like, and anyone who gets hurt in the process can suffer the consequences. That isn't Christianity. Boy, is the New Testament, full of language about, love God with your heart, mind, and soul, and then love your neighbor as yourself. And if you're living in a way that hurts your neighbor and other human beings, I don't know what you are, but you're not a Christian, or not any kind of Christian that Jesus would recognize. So that's one issue. And then the other side of it is there's an ancient kind of sort of philosophical idea called Gnosticism that has infected the church from time to time, that basically says, we can forget about the world because the world is bad and matter is bad. Christianity is all about escaping from this world and getting up to the spiritual reality up there, and matter is dirty and messy and somehow second class. And that has been condemned time and time again by mainstream Christians throughout history, because again, it doesn't look like the Bible. God created the world and said it's good. Jesus, didn't float around as a disembodied spirit, but he stepped into space and time and history and took on a body of flesh and blood and matter. And all of the New Testament repeatedly comes back to the idea that this world is a world that matters to God. That's why he gave the life of his son, in order to redeem it and rescue it and restore it. And so I think, I can understand why I think some Christians have gone that route, because there's a bit of fear that maybe, that issue's been captured by, sort of crazy progressive politics or whatever. But the answer there is not to let people who've captured the idea have fun with it. We need to grab hold of environmentalism. We need to grab hold of justice and bring it back and say, hey, it's a thoroughly Christian idea, and we're not going to let you run away with it.
That is wonderful. I don't think we've got time to do any more questions. There's some other good ones we could get to, but the clock is
there's
against
some
us.
good ones.
About a minute to go. So sorry, Bob, your question was next, and we're not going to have time to address it. So sorry about that. Can I end, though, by saying thank you so much to those of you who have joined us tonight and tuned in and listened across all the different platforms. It will be available on Catch Up for a good long time. So if you have missed any bits, you can come back and catch up with that. Thank you, Andy, for all your contributions tonight. There's obviously a lot of work and reading and thought gone in behind that. Thank you to David Hartnett, our producer. Can I also say that there's lots of interesting resources available on our website, solas-cpc.org. Our producer, David Hartnett, his dad is an environmental scientist who's written a wonderful article about God and the natural world on our website. So if you put the word Hartnett in, then you'll find a wonderful article on our website there. Thank you, too, for all those of you who have joined us. We really appreciate the time that you've spent with us. As a final slide, I'm going to ask David to put up now, which has got a couple of resources. If this has intrigued you or interested you, or you'd like to dig a bit further, here are a couple of things. In Andy's talk, he talked about kind of two big areas. One was our personal response. And if you're interested in exploring some of the Christian responses and Christian ideas yourself, we've got some friends up in Inverness who are running a course which starts next week called Christianity Explored. And that kind of opens up some of the main Christian ideas and gives you an opportunity to ask questions and engage with that. The link's on the screen there. You'd be very welcome to join them. They are Inverness, but they'll welcome people, because it's online at the moment, from all over the world. If you go to culduthalchristiancentre.org/Christianity-explored, they'll give you a really warm welcome. And you can explore any of these aspects of the Christian faith for yourself. If, on the other hand, you'd like to do some more reading about Christianity in the natural world, the book Andy's recommended for tonight is called Serve God, Save the Planet by J. Matthew Sleeth, who is a medical doctor who went on a journey himself of trying to become environmentally responsible and live out the Christian faith in the natural world all around him. So something to read if you want to dig into the ideas, if you want to explore personally what the Christian faith could mean for you and how Jesus Christ could meet with you and change you, then that course up in Inverness, which is online, is available to you completely free, and they would love to see you too. So finally, thank you to all those who have contributed to our webinar tonight, and thank you for joining us. It's been great to have you. Thanks again, Andy. Good night.
Thanks.